much for having me here. Does anyone know who Hogan Assessments is? So just to start off, I'm going to give you an introduction to who Hogan is, then talking about this identity versus reputation. So when April was talking about perception, we're really talking about this reputation piece, because identity is more about your perception of yourself. Reputation is other people's perceptions of you. And then why is personality important when we're talking about it in terms of this reputation component? And then thinking back, kind of going backwards, how does Hogan measure reputation? And then kind of moving forward, how do you manage your reputation? Like how do I do some things, maybe to put some strategies in place to maybe negate some of those different things? So who is Hogan? So Hogan is a personality assessment company. We've been around for a while. Doctors Hogan, Robert and Joyce Hogan started Hogan back in the 80s. Officially became a company in 1987. They were both professors at TU. They started the Industrial Organizational Psychology department there. So I don't know if anyone knows what IO psychology is. That's my background. IO psychology is a fancy way of saying business psychology. So thinking about psychological constructs, how do those apply to the workplace? And so particularly for Hogan, how does personality play out in the workplace? And what can personality do for organizations? So when we think about Hogan, we've been doing research for a really long time, and it's one reason why I really like Hogan, because of how steeped we are in the research. We still work with TU students, we have a lot of TU interns, we have a whole entire department dedicated just to doing research on our tools. So I work on the consultant side of the house, so I pair with our research team to work with organizations to think about how can we use the assessments to select employees, but also develop employees, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. So because of this kind of long, extensive history in the personality literature, we consider ourselves to be pretty experts on talent identification and development. The way that the Hogans kind of came to be is during the 80s, when we think about how assessments started to be used in organizations, there's a lot of cognitive ability assessments. And while cognitive ability assessments are predictive of work performance, you see a lot of kind of adverse impact. You see people being left out of selection decisions, particularly with minorities and women. And so the Hogan said, we know that we can predict work performance without leaving these vast groups out. And so they went back and they said, how can we look at personality and how can we look at it in terms of predicting work performance? And they took this reputation perspective on it. So not just what's your personality, how do you feel about interacting with people, how do you feel about yourself, what does your personality say for the behaviors that you're actually going to do in the future? Another really cool thing that I'm not really going to talk about today, but I have some brochures if anyone wants to learn about it, is leadership derailment. So Hogan has what we call the dark side of personality. So we have the bright side of personality, which is your day-to-day behaviors, the strengths and weaknesses you bring to your role. So I have a strength that I do like talking to people, and so that's why they asked me to do these kinds of presentations. But the development areas, maybe I talk a little bit too much at times, right? So how do I work on things like that? When we think about derailment or the dark side, we have a tool called the Hogan Development Survey, and this looks at whenever you stop self-monitoring. So think about, your first day on the job, you really want to impress the boss or impress your colleagues, and so you're really kind of monitoring what you're doing. You're monitoring how you organize your work, you're monitoring how you talk to others, you're monitoring kind of your emotional outbursts and different things like that. But whenever you stop self-monitoring, maybe that honeymoon period is over, maybe you're under a lot of stress and pressure, you don't have the capacity to really monitor, what are those behaviors that come out then? And so we have this whole tool called the Hogan Development Survey that looks at these derailers, these behaviors that might come out under stress and pressure and how they might get in the way of success. When you start looking at these derailers, these might be things that got you recognized. So we have we have a skill called colorful. And that's the being really socially engaging, but to the point that it's over dramatic at times, it's distracting to others. We call it when you confuse activity with productivity. So that might be, someone who's moving up through the leadership ranks. They're getting recognized for these, boisterous, kind of socially engaging behaviors. But then when they're in leadership and they actually have to, get down to business and do these other things, that colorful is actually what's getting in the way of their success and moving them forward in their career. And so when we think about these derailers, they start to become really, really detrimental as someone moves through their career life cycle. Another kind of cool and interesting thing about Hogan is that we're in over 57 countries and we have our assessments in over 46 languages. And so while we are based here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we have distributors all over the world that use our assessments and sell our assessments as well. And then to go along with that, and to when we think about the development kind of component of that, we have an extensive coaching network. So I do feedbacks at times, but we also have people who have been in industry for a long, long time in different components of industry. So we have a doctor that's one of our coaches. We have, old execs that are one of our coaches. And so they are experts not only in Hogan, but also kind of in the whole career life cycle. And so they'll be able to give people kind of development opportunities and talk through those conversations with them. As you think about the assessments, and we have kind of 3 core assessments. It is a self-assessment. So, I, Amber, will go on and complete the different assessments. But what the assessments are actually measuring are reputation. And so when we think about it is, yes, I answer the question this way, but people who answer questions this way, how are they perceived by others? So I just wanted to give that short snippet to talk about this distinction between identity versus reputation. I love the quote that the you that you think you know is hardly worth knowing, right? So all the great things that I think about myself, those are great and all, but what am I actually portraying to others? What are other people actually seeing? What is that reputation component to things? So why is personality important when we're thinking about reputation, right? So what does personality actually do? If we think of this iceberg analogy, we use this a lot when we talk about what we do. Reputation or perception starts right here at the waterline, right? So this is what is actually seen to others. The why behind all of those components is right here, starting with the personality component. So I like to kind of give an example if I'm thinking about a particular job. So let's say, for example, my job. I'm a consultant. I have to talk to people a lot. Today I was on the phone trying to sell our assessments to a healthcare organization, right? So those are results. Results are if I actually sell the assessments, if I sell this, development suite of assessments to the healthcare organization. How do I do it? Talking nicely, talking intelligently, having to put together a strategy in terms of selling it. But why do I do it? Because I'm high sociability, I'm high Prudence, which is our organization scale, I'm detail-oriented, and I can think strategically in the balance with practicality. And so those are all scales that underlie it. Those are all the personality components. And so when we think about this broader picture, they have no idea that I am all those things. What they see are those end results. What my boss sees is if I actually, close the deal. So that's why personality is important. It underlies our behaviors, our actions, our reactions and interactions with others, the way that we organize our instruments, talks about stress tolerance, talks about initiative and drive, talks about the social component, building relationships. It provides insight not only to you, but also to others, how you actually perform your job and the job performance and the job stress that you might be under. It influences our effectiveness at work and leading with others. And I think what's really interesting too is when you take the personality assessments and you get this feedback, it identifies probably some strengths that you already knew, but it also might identify some blind spots that you weren't aware of. Usually coming from that derailer measure that we have, but also when we think about all the strengths of one component. So I was talking about Prudence, which we'll get to the example of, being detail-oriented, organized, scheduled. There's a lot of strengths, but you don't think about the drawbacks of maybe being too rigid because things didn't go into according to schedule, maybe not being able to be adaptable. A few examples of some items that we have. So this is from our Prudence scale. So I don't endorse any of these, but I frequently do things on impulse. Yeah. People think I'm a nonconformist. I like to do things on the spur of the moment. I never know what I will do tomorrow. Sounds pretty cool. Sometimes I enjoy going against the rules. But anyway, I'm fun, spontaneous. I look forward to starting each day with a clean slate, right? I don't plan ahead. Ready to meet whatever challenges life has to offer, right? So this is someone probably described as pretty adaptable, flexible. They can kind of go with the flow. They don't need to have a lot of structure, process to go along with things. When you think about the reputation piece, though, individuals. So these are actually some of our items that we have, and we've mapped it back to. So the way that when you take a step back, the way that we kind of developed the assessments is that we had people complete the actual assessments, and then they gave behavioral rating forms to their spouse, some significant other, and then their supervisor, right? And so then we look at the way that people respond to the items, and then we'll look at the way that people describe those people. And so that's how we get to this reputation component. So individuals who responded to the items this way, they're described as tending to be inattentive to details, resisting supervision, right? Sometimes I go against the rules, ignore small process steps, not plan ahead, and really think through the consequences of their actions, right? So then if you go back to this piece, this is someone who's really fun, like you want to like go on vacation with them, but you do not want them to plan the vacation, right? Like, you're like, we're here in Barbados, what are we doing? I have no idea. Like, let's go to the bar, I don't know. So there's a lot of, when we think about it, you think of this identity piece and you're like, yeah, that person's awesome, I'm done, everyone wants to hang out with me. No one wants you to plan anything though, right? And so you see this discrepancy between the identity component and the reputation component. One part of my job is I have people go through the assessments and then I give them feedback on it. And a lot of times they're just like, yeah, that's totally me. And sometimes they're like, no, I have no idea like who you're describing here. And I'm like, well, I describe it a different way. And they're like, yeah, maybe not, still not me. I'm like, imagine this. Take your report to your significant other, whoever that may be, and see what they say. And oftentimes you're like, oh yeah, they would totally describe me in this way. Yeah, I'm super fun and I'm adaptable, but yeah, they hate going on vacation with me because I don't plan anything. And so you start to see this kind of, where do we find this overlap? Because sometimes those people have a lot of strategic self-awareness and they realize these things about themselves, but oftentimes that's not there. And that's where we really start to have those rich development conversations of what are some different things we can leverage and what are some things we can start to put some behavioral changes around. So that's just kind of the overview of how we conducted things. So people completed the tools, we had them get their behaviors rated, and then where do we see the overlap there? When we think about reputation, because it is kind of linked to those behaviors, it's strongly linked to your past behaviors, strongly linked to your present behaviors, and then strongly linked to your future behaviors. If I have time, I'll show another clip later that talks about the best predictor of future performance is past performance, right? So when we think about using the tools in a selection context, we're really able to show organizations, if you hire these people who are going to be higher Prudence or Prudence, whatever it may be, these are kind of employees that you're likely going to be hiring, right? Do you want people who are adaptable, flexible? You might see needing these roles and those behaviors in some roles, like a marketing person, an artist, things like that. You might not want someone low Prudence as an accountant. Right? So when we think about managing a reputation and changing those behaviors, it's not easy. It's actually really hard because it's a lot of systematic, a lot of effort that's put into it, and a lot of times it's fueled by this feedback component, right? So April probably would have never changed her behaviors of looking on her phone at the back of the church or talking to others. She hadn't got the feedback of, hey, you're kind of not that friendly. So without that really accurate feedback, it's really hard to change that behavior because if you have that identity component still operating, you're thinking you're good. Yeah, I can work independently, I'm a really good listener. Like, of course, why would I need to change those behaviors? Because no one wants to talk to you, right? So thinking about it that way. You'll never change those behaviors if you don't have any of that feedback coming back to you. And that's really where Hogan can be useful, where these kind of reputational tools can be useful. Hogan's not the only answer. We also think about it in terms of maybe like a 360, right? So getting feedback from, a supervisor, your direct reports, your colleagues as well. And so thinking about how are they perceiving those behaviors as well. Going back to Hogan, how do we measure reputation? Like I talked about earlier, we have those two different components. We have the bright side, the Hogan Personality Inventory, and then the Hogan Development Survey. And thinking about how do you leverage those different strengths and what are some of those behaviors that people are seeing you exhibit under stress and pressure that may be getting in the way of success. We also have another inventory called the Motives, Values, Preferences Inventory, and this one is a little more distal to behaviors. This is really more about what is motivating those behaviors. So April talked about maybe not talking as much in front of people, so probably lower sociability that you might see here on the Hogan Personality Inventory. She might also be high reserved, which is kind of that slower sociability turned up in terms of stress and pressure. So it's like closing the doors, going to your office all by yourself, not talking to anyone. But there might be something she tried to change her behaviors, right? So what was the motivation behind that? Probably getting some feedback, but also maybe she's high affiliation, which is our measure of how much do you want to interact with someone, how much do you value kind of relationships, collaboration, and things along that. And so sometimes when I have conversations with people, you'll see this value, and then you wonder, and then you can use behaviors from this to leverage to get that value or that need met, and these are the behaviors that get in the way. So if you're high affiliation, You want to hang out with people, you want to build relationships, but you're low sociability. You don't proactively engage in initiating relationships. You know, you kind of take a step back, hang out in the back of the room. There's a tension there, right? And so how do you get that need met? And so when you think about the assessments kind of all together, you really start to build this really unique development conversation of what really motivates you, what drives